A man in London pulls up a menu and points, "I'll have the chicken curry." A woman in Tokyo slides into a booth. On the counter, keraisu, curry rice. A family in Durban unwraps a hollowed-out loaf of bread, steam rising from inside it. Bunny chow, also curry. A takeout container changes hands on a rainy street in Toronto. For cities, 4 plates. One word doing all the work. Now we go looking for the source. We go to India, the place the whole world assumes this word came from. And here's the strange part. Nobody's cooking it. In a kitchen in Chennai, someone's finishing a pot of kazambu. In Kolkata, a fish stew called jal simmers on the stove. In Lucknow, it's Ceylon. In Kerala, it might be a dozen different things depending on the street you're standing on. Ask for the curry in any of these kitchens, in any Indian language, and you'll get a confused look. Because there isn't one. There never was. So if curry isn't really an Indian word for an Indian dish, where did it come from? And how did it end up being the most famous word in the world for food that, by most accounts, doesn't actually exist? To understand how strange this is, you have to see what India's food actually looks like up close. Head north, and you're in a world of wheat flatbreads, slow-simmered meats, dairy-rich gravies built for cold winters, and royal kitchens. Head south, and the entire logic changes. Rice instead of wheat, coconut and tamarind instead of cream, lentil stews like sambar and raisin that share almost nothing with what's happening 1,000 miles north. Go east toward Bengal, and mustard oil and river fish define the plate. Go west toward Goa, and 5 centuries of Portuguese contact have folded vinegar and pork into the local spice tradition. Every one of these traditions has its own name for what it's doing. Not one of them, in its own language, has ever called itself curry. Search the historical record, cookbooks, court documents, religious texts, trade ledgers written in Tamil, Sanskrit, Bengali, Persian, Hindi, and the word simply isn't there. Not once describing native food before European contact. So somewhere between an untouched subcontinent and a modern menu in Toronto, somebody invented this word. The question is who? And the honest answer is, nobody's entirely sure. Before we go looking for the culprit, it's worth understanding exactly what was being flattened. Northwest of modern Delhi, at a site called Farmana, archaeologists studying the Indus Valley civilization found something remarkable preserved in ancient teeth and pottery, residues of turmeric, ginger, and garlic. For 1,000 years old, some of the earliest direct evidence of spiced cooking anywhere on Earth. This wasn't a cuisine in its infancy. By the time anyone in Europe had heard the word spice, South Asian cooks had already been layering flavor for millennia. Through the Vedic period, through centuries of Tamil literature describing food and cooking with startling specificity, through royal kitchens and village hearths developing techniques that would later travel the world under someone else's name. Each region didn't just have different ingredients. It had a different grammar for food entirely, its own words for gravy, its own logic for what goes in a pot and why. This is the world that a single 4-letter word was about to walk into. Vasco da Gama's ships reached the Indian coast. By 1510, Portugal has claimed Goa, and Portuguese traders, moving through markets, ports, and kitchens where they don't speak the language, start writing down what they hear. They record something like Carol, or Carol, an attempt to spell a sound in a language they're only just encountering. Where exactly that sound came from is where historians start to disagree. And it's worth sitting in that disagreement for a moment, because nobody has ever fully resolved it. One theory points to Tamil. The word curry, which could mean a sauce or relish eaten with rice. A word merchants along the Coromandel coast may well have used to describe exactly the kind of dish Portuguese traders were being served. A second theory points further south and west, to Kannada, where a similar-sounding word means to fry or to cook, describing not the dish, but the method. Spices hitting hot oil, the technique still used at the start of almost every dish now called curry. A third theory is stranger still, that Carol wasn't a direct borrowing from any single language at all, but a Portuguese invention, a word stitched together from fragments of several languages they encountered, standing for nothing in particular except that food we can't quite name. 3 theories. Nook and Fishchin. What we do know is that a word built on some combination of mishearing, approximation, and convenience had just been created, and it was about to meet an empire with the resources to make it permanent. The British East India Company is founded. Over the following decades, trading posts rise at Surat, Madras, Bombay, Calcutta, and British officials, traders, and soldiers begin living for the first time inside the world they try to profit from. Many of them go further than trade. They adopt local customs. They employ Indian cooks, consommes, who prepare meals adapted, dish by dish, to unfamiliar palates. And in their letters, journals, and household accounts, the British start reaching for a word to describe almost anything spiced, saucy, and unfamiliar on their plate. That word is curry, and it gets used for everything: a Bengali fish stew, a Punjabi lentil dish, a Mughal meat preparation, regardless of whether those dishes have anything in common beyond being cooked somewhere in South Asia. In 1747, that convenience makes it into print. Hannah Glass publishes The Art of Cookery Made Plain and Easy, and inside it, the first known English-language curry recipe: black pepper, coriander, rice, later joined by ginger and turmeric in updated editions. It's a small, specific moment. A British author, writing for a British kitchen, formalizing a word she likely never heard spoken in the region it claimed to represent. But once a word is in print, it stops being a guess. It starts being a category. Here's where the story stops being about mistranslation and starts being about manufacturing. By the late 1700s, British pharmacies and spice merchants are selling something India never produced: pre-mixed curry powder. A single jar, standing in for hundreds of regional spice traditions that were, in their original form, ground fresh daily, sometimes by hand, and varied not just village to village, but household to household. Companies like Cross and Blackwell turn it into a serious business, exporting tins of standardized spice blends back out across the empire. By the Victorian era, curry powder shows up in nearly every English cookbook, and it's sold in pharmacies alongside medicine. Why compress an entire continent's spice culture into one shelf-stable formula? The practical reasons are almost mundane. Pre-mixed spices were easier to store and ship than fresh ones. A single product was simpler to standardize and sell at scale. Dried powder lasted through long voyages in tropical heat, where fresh ingredients wouldn't survive. And then there's the detail that lands a little harder than the rest. On long sea voyages, a strong, standardized spice blend was also useful for disguising the taste of meat and vegetables that had started to turn. Centuries of hyperlocal, freshly ground, deeply specific cooking, reduced to a jar that could mask spoiled food on a ship deck. That's not mistranslation anymore. That's an entire culinary tradition being repackaged for someone else's convenience and sold back to the world as authentically Indian. So let's take stock of what's actually true, because a surprising amount of what most people believe about curry turns out to be wrong. Myth: curry gets its name from the curry leaf. False. That's a folk explanation that came later. The word almost certainly predates any connection to that specific plant. Myth: curry powder is a traditional Indian product. Also false. It's a British commercial invention, built for British kitchens and British trade routes. Myth: all Indian food is curry. Not even close. Biryani, kebabs, tandoori dishes, dosas, none of them fall under that label and never did. And maybe the most surprising one: Indians, broadly speaking, don't call their own food curry. Walk through India today and you'll hear curry mostly in English-language menus written for tourists or in international communication. Not in the kitchen, not at the family table. The word that the entire world associates with Indian food is, in a very real sense, one of the least Indian things about it. Which raises the real question: if the word barely exists in the place it supposedly came from, how did it end up conquering the rest of the planet? The answer is, the word left India almost entirely on British terms. and then it stopped being British too. Follow it to Japan. In the 1870s, the British Royal Navy introduces curry to Japanese sailors training alongside them. The Japanese Navy adopts it, not as a taste of South Asia, but as practical shipboard food, easy to prepare in bulk, nutritious, and stable at sea. Over decades, it becomes something distinctly its own, thicker, sweeter, milder, served as karaisu, curry rice. Today, Friday night on Japanese naval vessels is still, by tradition, curry night. A ritual with roots in a British ship deck a century and a half ago, now fully, unmistakably Japanese. Follow it instead to Durban, South Africa. Starting in 1860, Indian indentured laborers are brought to work the sugar plantations of Natal, carrying real culinary knowledge with them, not a British approximation of it. Out of hardship and adaptation comes Durban curry. Hotter, more tomato-forward than most Indian cooking, eventually finding its most iconic form in bunny chow, curry served inside a hollowed-out loaf of bread, born as practical, portable street food, and now a defining dish of an entire city. The pattern repeats elsewhere with its own local signature. Curry goat and roti in the Caribbean, carried by Indian laborers after the abolition of slavery. King traditions in Thailand absorbing the word curry through trade and colonial contact, while keeping their own distinct ingredients and identity. Laksa in Malaysia and Singapore, a Malay-Chinese-Indian fusion built on a curry broth. None of these are the same dish. None of them are pretending to be. What they share is only the word, a British shorthand that, once it left the empire that coined it, got picked up by cooks who had every right to make it their own. So, after 4,000 years of Indian cooking, a Portuguese mishearing, a British cookbook, a jar of standardized spice powder, and 100 years of global reinvention, what actually is curry? It was never really a food word. Not the start. It was a shortcut, a way for traders and officials to avoid learning hundreds of real names for hundreds of real dishes by inventing one word that fit none of them precisely. And yet here we are, 300 years later. That shortcut has become something nobody planned for, a genuinely beloved, independently evolved food tradition spanning London curry houses, Japanese naval decks, Durban street corners, and Caribbean kitchens. Wrong at the start, real by the end. Nobody's asking you to stop ordering a curry, just to know what's actually in that word the next time you say it. Because the next time you order one, you're not really ordering a dish. You're ordering 300 years of mishearing, empire, adaptation, and, somehow, despite all of it, genuine love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next story.